Today I'm flying from Toronto Pearson to Edmonton International Airport on one of Canada's low-cost airlines, Swoop. Join me as I go through Toronto Pearson, Terminal 3, on board Swoop, and finally into arrivals in Edmonton. We start our journey at Toronto Pearson Airport's Terminal 3. Swoop is an ultra-low-cost carrier owned by WestJet, another Canadian airline, and both operate out of Terminal 3. Terminal 1 at Pearson is mainly Air Canada and Star Alliance Airlines, while Terminal 3 houses most other airlines. I took this flight in May of 2021 when there were still many COVID-19 restrictions in place on travel in Canada. I had checked in online the previous day, however I had 2 checked bags to drop. Despite the rest of the airport being extremely quiet and only a few people in front of me in line, bag drop still took around 20 minutes. This was because the gate agents were being very strict on the bag weights, so few passengers had to repack their bags. After dropping bags, I headed to security. Every passenger had a temperature screening, which only took a few seconds. Security was also quick and I was through in no time. Once through security, I checked the departure board. Most of the flights were within Canada and I saw only 2 to 3 international flights scheduled for that day. I was also surprised to see that my Swoop flight had 2 destinations, Edmonton, Alberta and Victoria, British Columbia. But more on that later. It was quiet walking through the terminal to my departure gate. Most of the retail shops and sit-down food places were closed, but some fast food places, including a Tim Hortons and Booster Juice, were open. Boarding commenced in groups, which was found on the boarding pass. Boarding was smooth and soon I was on the plane. On boarding, every passenger was also handed a disinfectant wipe for their seat. As you may have noticed, Swoop's main color is pink, and the cabin had a pink theme to match that. Boarding was completed and the flight was almost entirely full, which was surprising given the COVID-19 pandemic and relative quietness of the terminal. I had been allocated a middle seat at check-in, but lucked out and had one of the few rows with an empty seat, so I moved into the window. After takeoff, flight attendants made the usual announcements and reminded passengers to wear their masks with nose and mouth covered at all times except when eating or drinking. Most passengers were very good with keeping their masks on, and flight attendants were also periodically checking that passengers had their masks on correctly and reminding the passengers that were having trouble remembering how to wear their masks. Now, taking a look at the seat, there was a literature pocket with a flight safety card and airsick bag. There was also a standard tray table, electric plug, USB outlet, and another seat back pocket. The legroom was below average, even for someone with shorter legs like me. I can't imagine how someone over 6 feet would manage in a seat like this. But overall, the seat was as expected, if not a little better than what you might find on other low-cost carriers. Flight attendants came through the cabin a few times with the onboard menu with items for sale. I didn't get to take a look at this as they were just on the iPad that the flight attendant was carrying. I didn't buy anything on board as I'd gotten some food from Tim Hortons in the terminal beforehand. The lavatory was standard and clean, and not too tight of a fit. This was a 4-hour flight, and by the 2nd hour, I found myself incredibly bored. I don't often find myself flying a 4-hour flight, as I usually fly much shorter or much longer flights, so I wasn't sure how to occupy my time, aside from staring out the window and playing on my phone. This flight was also Wi-Fi enabled, and you can see the prices here. However, that was pretty much it in terms of potential entertainment. We finally started our descent into Edmonton, which is quite different from Toronto. Overall, I found this flight to be alright, especially considering the price I paid, so I was willing to trade a bit of comfort for a much cheaper fare. The seats were comfortable enough even though the legroom was tight, and I was quite happy to have the electric plug and USB outlet, which you probably wouldn't find on most other low-cost carriers. Swoop advertises itself as an ultra-low-fare airline, and true to that, everything was extra on top of the base fare. I had 2 checked bags, which I paid extra for when booking the flight, as fees for the checked bags increased the closer the day of departure. I also carried on 1 backpack, which was included in the cost of the base fare, and 1 roller bag, which I had to pay extra for when I purchased the flight. Other extras that were available for purchase included paid seat selection. Even with all of these extras for purchase, I still ended up paying only half of what I would have paid if I did this same flight with Air Canada or WestJet, which is probably why this flight was so full compared to my return flight from Edmonton to Toronto on Air Canada. Stay tuned for that video. After landing in Edmonton, the disembarking process was a bit different. Because the plane and quite a few passengers were continuing on to Victoria, the flight attendants were very clear that the plane had landed in Edmonton and only Edmonton passengers should disembark, while passengers continuing on to Victoria should stay seated. I don't think I've ever been on a route that does this before, so it was something new for me. I'm also not sure if the Victoria passengers were allowed to stay on the plane while it was refueling, or if they were just told to stay seated and then disembark after all of the Edmonton passengers had left. Other than the flight attendants reminding Victoria passengers that we were in Edmonton, there was no other disembarkation process, and everyone leaving the plane in Edmonton crowded into the aisles. Entering the terminal, it was a short walk past other boarding gates to claim my luggage, and then into a taxi onto my accommodation. Thanks for watching! Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more.